We need to figure out whether we are on radio or television. The nature of the assignment that I was able to see, that means the scripts that were provided, were largely meant for the ear. And that is because it is impossible for story number one, which is in order of the presentation, there was a foreign news thing, the local news, and a documentary. Now, all of those involved reading. And so it is almost impossible when one is reading like that to be able to direct one's comments toward a camera. So this is ideally in a kind of a radio news situation. Although some of you thought of yourselves as being news presenters in front of a camera. So you might want to keep that in mind for future reference. You don't have to only think of camera as being the only option when it comes to communicating with audiences. And in this case, you would have been wise to think of reaching the ear rather than ears and eyes. There was no supporting visual to help you along at all. So that's it. The only difference was the last one, which we refer to as the live event. That could also be for radio. It doesn't have to be for television, although some of you would have thought of yourselves as being at an event that was taking place live in front of a camera because you referred to behind me and so on and so forth. Is that wrong? No, I'm not talking about shortcomings here. Okay, having said that, news, I'll deal with that brief, and I'll focus on what we have. So I'll go back to the scripts or the documents that we have. And that might be useful to consider since you all know what I am talking about. So in the foreign news, what is this? Now, are we just reading something on a page, or are we comprehending what the script is actually telling? We refer to this as a news story. What are the elements in this story? That's very important to comprehend. Not just read words and sentences on a page. If it is news, it has to touch the mind and maybe a bit of the heart as well. There has to be a comprehension of the subject. Now there is that, and with that comes other thing, which is attendant, and I'm not going to deal with all things because there's no time now. But in this very broad area, one other thing is accurate reading. So you comprehend and you communicate accurately. So the accurate reading becomes very important. Then we can't be in a mighty hurry. We have to itemize the elements of the story. So what we have here in foreign news, if you want to look at your own scripts again, that might be useful because I'm talking about what we really have with us. So Biden is mentioned there, but the story is not about Biden, is it? No. There is reference to an organization or a grouping which is referred to as the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, also known as the Quad. Your audience needs to know what it is. So you have to be deliberate. You select the phrasing. In other words, you pace yourself. You have understood what this is communicating, and this is about the Quad. Now, what about the Quad? Well, it says that Shinzo Abe, remember the pronunciation for the former Japanese Prime Minister is Abe, Shinzo Abe, and he launched it. Is that the most important thing? No. But there is a sub-story that becomes important, and that is China being uncomfortable with the Quad's presence and its involvement. Now, Is that all the story? No. The Quad is now, which is an old thing from 2007, is now getting ready to pass judgment on something that is taking place in Myanmar. Myanmar is not Myanmar. Being Asian, we should get that right. It's Myanmar. I know some BBC people and fellows in the West say Myanmar, but that's, we should know it better because we are closer to them than they are. So it's Myanmar. Yeah. So, and it is a surprise to me that very few of you had an idea of the overthrown democratic leader being Aung San Suu Kyi. That's the name. And that's been around in the news for a long time. I'm surprised that y'all hadn't caught it. Is that a criticism? No, but I would like to alert you to the need to be well aware of what's going on around us. So Aung San Suu Kyi is the pronunciation of that name, although it's written somewhat differently in the English language, but let that be. So now I'll take one sentence there, or maybe two, and try to help you to figure out what it is I'm trying to say about itemizing the elements of the story and making it good for the ear to be able to understand. Because there's a whole lot of words, whole lot of sentences, but what is the story? So this, I'm picking up a sentence from the middle. The summit follows talks on February 18th among the foreign ministers of the Quad when they pressed jointly for a restoration of democracy in Myanmar after the military overthrew the democratic leader Aung San Suu Kyi on February the 1st. That's one idea communicated, that an old thing is being refurbished for judgment in the present day after February the 1st. Then it says, US officials cast the meeting as a key way of exerting pressure on Yangon, I beg your pardon, on Yangon, as India and Japan enjoy closer relationships with Myanmar's military, which has historically counted on China as its main source of support. Look at the complexity of that. There's Aung San Suu Kyi, there's Myanmar, there's India, and Yangon being pressured to think again, but China is involved. You know, it's a very complicated idea. We have to understand it. And then it says in the next sentence, the Quad foreign ministers, however, were careful not to make explicit mention of China, which has voiced alarm at what it sees as an effort to gang up on its interests in Asia. So if you comprehend it, that's the way we might want to read it. Okay, let me move to the next local story. Now that also has all sorts of stuff there, but we'll take this thing about Pavitra Vannayarachi's mentioned there. Why are we talking about that? Because your listener needs to understand what's going on. Otherwise, they will miss it completely. They'll hear a couple of names mentioned and they'll not be clear. So I'll take it from the holy businessman, which is an odd expression, but there it is. The holy businessman had also sold the miracle cure to companies as well as temples, local media reported. Now you notice those last three words, local media reported. That is almost a drop line. That is not part of the story. So you need to give your voice a different tone with those last three words. So here's the main part of it is, the holy businessman had also sold the miracle cure to companies as well as temples, local media reported. Then the next sentence, he had also given a sample to politicians and ministers. So that's an important element of the story, what he had done. Temples, companies, and politicians and ministers. Now, next one. Health minister. Now, it is a surprise to the audience that this man has gone so far. Health Minister Pavitra Vannayarachi also took the portion, although her own ministry had not approved it as a medicine. There's a story there. So this is enough to help you understand how we need to analyze the story before we start reading it. We have to phrase it, we have to observe the punctuation, and we really need to fairly quickly work out what is the story about and then carry on. Now, I must move on to this documentary. Now, remember, Whereas the news is reportage, a documentary usually is storytelling. We need to understand what the story is. And I think we all agreed that this is a tough one to make a story out of. And Brian and I also had a little chat about that earlier. And we said, oh my goodness, what is this? You know, yeah, so, but we have to do it. So pronunciation becomes important here. There are unfamiliar terms, and we are reaching the year here. We have to reach the year. Now, we are starting off by mentioning the background. What is the background? The Ionian Revolt. We can't rush that, can we? This is storytelling. The Ionian Revolt, and you pause there. And associated revolts, so it's not just the one, but more than one revolt. So the Ionian Revolt and associated revolts in Aeolis, Doris, Cyprus, and Caria were military rebellions by several regions of Asia Minor against Persian rule, lasting from 499 to 493 BC. Now, that's one little element of the story. It continues. At the heart of the rebellion was the dissatisfaction of the Greek cities of Asia Minor with the tyrants appointed by Persia to rule them, along with opposition to the individual actions of two Milesian tyrants, Histiaeus and Aristogoras. Now, we don't need to go on and on, but we need to show or demonstrate a difference with the documentary as opposed to the news items. They are very, very different. The news is kind of cold, is reportage. This one, you need to get the funk of it. You need to be involved with the story and you want to communicate it. This could be children, it could be teachers of children and so on and so forth. And please watch pronunciations where possible. Now, I just made some notes here. I mentioned Ionian, yes, that's important. It's tyrants, not tyrants. And also I noticed that with the story number 2, the local one, all said syrup or syrup. It's actually syrup. It's not up at all. So just small things, but if you want to be professional, you need to get it right. So it's syrup. Yeah, I mentioned Shinzo Abe. Okay. And the final one, let me conclude very quickly. I've spoken too long. The live event. I would do it for radio because you're not supported by any cameras or anything like that. And you have to imagine, so it's easier to imagine for radio than it is for television, which of course, as I said, you can really point to things that are taking place, but here there's no such thing. So how do you do it? Well, you have to really imagine, and the point was made that there needs to be some involvement, shall we say, almost emotional, but you have a responsibility not to be too emotional to create fear, anxiety, undue excitement, or even panic. So you have to have a distance between emotion and the facts, but at the same time communicate the excitement of the moment. So how do you do it? There are obviously many, many ways, and all of you all tried very hard, and one of you got really involved. Is that good? Yes, that was good. So you have to plan your thing. You didn't have too much time to plan, but you need to do that. Maybe even take a few notes. When I used to do live events for radio, I mean, it wasn't tragic events, but maybe other events that were taking place, maybe visiting dignitaries from overseas or heads of state and so on and so forth. Even though I need to comment on what is happening straight away, I have already got some notes down, and some of you had made that effort to find out the background of these places. Note that the pronunciation is important here. It's Côte d'Ivoire. It's a French pronunciation for Ivory Coast. So it's Côte d'Ivoire. And this is for further reference. I'm not blaming anybody or trying to show off that I know too much, but get the pronunciation right. And it's Abidjan. Abidjan is the capital of Côte d'Ivoire. And if you pronounce it well, it's easy for the listener to know who you're talking about or what place you're talking about, the geographical location. and some of you made the effort to get some research done. That was good. So there are various ways to deal with it, but I think you all had a pretty good idea, and some of you did better with the excitement thing. Thank you very much again, Bri and Azra, for being with me on this.